Robert Barker, Market Insights Analyst at Meat and Livestock Australia.
Today you've given a talk on the outlook for both the cattle and the sheep lamb industry. Firstly, focusing on cattle, and what have we seen in recent months with price trends and demand?
Well, in the Australian cattle industry over the last 5 or 6 months, we've seen a very big improvement in cattle prices at the sale yard and over the hook level. And that's really been in response to strong overseas demand for an extended period of time, particularly in our major markets, including the United States, Japan and Korea, as well as ongoing strong demand from China, which has really come on in the last few years.
Why has that demand occurred in just recent months?
The big change that's happened for us over the last 6 months is really an extension of what's been happening in the United States over the last 2 years. There's been a big decrease in cattle slaughter in the US, and that's resulted in much less beef being produced there and available for consumption in the US. So a lot of what Australia is producing is complementing the United States production and meeting a demand that they can't meet themselves at the moment.
Now, you've noted that a lot of plants are being shut down in the US. What's actually happening?
Well, what's happened over the last couple of years is in response to the drawdown in the US cattle herd, which is currently close to 60-year lows, the big cattle producing areas in the US have really started to aim to rebuild their cattle herds. So cow and heifer slaughter has really slowed down in the last 2 years, and as a result the supply of cattle for slaughter has declined, and a number of plants in the US have either closed or been mothballed for the short term.
Now, given that they're trying to rebuild the herd in the US, are you seeing signs that the herd is increasing in numbers?
Yes, we are at the moment. There's been quite a large increase in the number of cows being retained in the last couple of years, and a large number of heifers being retained on farm rather than being put into the feedlot system where they normally go.
Could that potentially have a major impact on Australia in the next couple of years once that herd is rebuilt?
Down the track it will have an impact. There'll be an increase in US supply of cattle coming through the feedlots, and as well as an increase in the number of cows being culled at the end of their productive life. And a large proportion of what Australia exports is lean beef from cows and bulls into the US. So it will have an impact a couple of years down the track, but there's still quite a while for that cattle cycle to come into effect.
What about other nations, production in some of our other competitors? Are we seeing any rebuild or reduction, or what's going on there?
Well, it's almost a case of what's good for Australia is also good for a number of our competitors as well. In Brazil, there's an intention to increase production over time and to improve their exports as well. At the moment, they're somewhat restricted by import regulations of some countries that they might export to normally, but over time we do expect that they will get better market access to places like China and into the Middle East, particularly into Saudi Arabia.
Turning our attention to lambs and sheep meat as a whole, and what are you noting there with the production and the markets at the moment domestically?
Australian production has been quite high over the last couple of years, much higher than what we've seen in the previous 5 years, although through that time we did have a big drop when there was a large focus on flock rebuilding right across the country. So we have seen a bit of an increase in production, but lamb and sheep prices have both held up very well in the face of that, and our exports are still moving well to a wide variety of countries.
What about over the Tasman, our major competitor from an export point of view, New Zealand, on the world lamb market and sheep meat market? What are they doing?
Over the last 10 years or so, they've had a big switch from the lamb production industry across to dairy in response to high prices and strong demand out of China in particular. So the New Zealand sheep flock is down as low as 30 million head, which is far below what they would have had 20, 30, 40 years ago. As a result, the productive capacity of their flock is much lower than it's been in the past, and there's at the moment not a great expectation that New Zealand lamb and mutton production will increase significantly in the next few years.
What about demand then? Are you expecting the demand to stay really reasonably stable, or what are you looking at out there in the countries that consume Australian lamb?
Well, one of the good things about lamb on the global market is it's relatively a niche product in a number of markets, so it's not likely to get knocked off by cheaper proteins in a number of places. Where there's lamb available, it's bought because there is a strong demand for the product. In other places, particularly in the Middle East, is the obvious example, is one of our major competitors in a number of other markets, which is pork, is not a competitor at all there. So, and in those markets where there is growing demand, it's the Middle East and China are the large growing markets for sheep meat. It's a result of increased incomes, increased populations, and in response to that is a greater demand for protein, of which lamb and mutton is a very good source, and they're willing to buy.
Now, you've indicated New Zealand may start increasing production, particularly with dairy prices being quite flat or poor at the moment in comparison, so return for New Zealand producers. What impact will that have on production if they do a major rebuild of the New Zealand flock?
One of the main differences in the export of lamb between Australia and New Zealand is the different market access that each country has. Australia has a sheep meat quota of just over 19,000 tonnes per year into the European Union, and New Zealand has a quota of 227,000 tonnes. At the moment, their utilisation of the EU quota is around 70%, so they have quite a margin, quite a bit of room to move into one of the highest value markets in the world, which, if that becomes one of their focuses again, wouldn't take away from Australian markets around the world. The other focus they have is in China, where they're a few years ahead of us in terms of tariffs on product, just because the free trade agreement was reached between China and New Zealand a few years ago, so they're a little bit ahead of us in China, so most likely it'd be a focus in those two regions.
Are we able to catch up with the Chinese free trade agreement that we're just signing off on?
Over time, it will match it at zero for the tariff, yes.
Robert Barker, thanks for talking with us today.
Pleasure, Bruce. Thanks for your time.